Secretary, Ministry of Information Broadcasting, Shri Udit Kumar Verma ji, Advisor to the Prime Minister, Dr. Sam Petroda, Chairperson of Prasar Bharati, Shrimati Mrinal Pandey ji, my colleague and good friend, Mr. Manish Tewari, ladies and gentlemen. I have a prepared text with me. It's a very safe speech. Civil servants are trained to keep their ministers out of trouble. So therefore, they do try their best. And the reason why I was very diffident about speaking at the inaugural session itself is because some of the views that I may articulate may then be misinterpreted as government policy or government thinking on a particular issue. And I do not want to really preempt the deliberations of this committee, which have been given a very wide remit to go across the spectrum and come up with a range of views. And what I would like to assure Mr. Petroda, somebody who we've grown up eulogizing for the contribution which he made to the entire telecom paradigm in the 80s and 90s, is that the report will not get consigned to the darkest closet in the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. Having said that, since I have some friends from the media also here, I would like to caveat my remarks by saying that these are not policy pronouncements of the government. These are my personal views as an individual, which I would leave for you. If they're worth consideration, please do give them a thought. If not, I would be more than happy if you consign them to the dustbin. I can live with both those situations. As the spokesperson of the Indian National Congress, for 5 years, I dealt with the front end of the media. And for the past 5 months, as the Minister for Information and Broadcasting, it has fallen to my remit and responsibility to deal with the back end of the media. And I can tell you that the front end was just wonderful. What preoccupies most of my mind space when I'm not routinely dealing with bureaucratic files is not whether you require a public broadcaster or not. That's something which I will come to later. Is whether you require a Minister for Information and Broadcasting or you at all require a Ministry for Information and Broadcasting. I think that's the fundamental question which needs to be answered. Are we trying to fight the battles of the past in an era which has completely changed and transformed itself? Or we need to look at new governance structures in this changed paradigm? As someone who's been trained as a lawyer, who's practiced as a lawyer for the last 20 years of my life, organizational structures and the manner in which they are constituted, I think are fundamental to most of our problems and our solutions. And which brings me to the question that I think it's important to address this question, that does India require a public broadcaster? And if India requires a public broadcaster, what really should be the characteristics or the character of that public broadcaster? Do we really require 33 channels? Do we require a public broadcaster which does soap operas and comedy and entertainment and stuff like that? Or do we require a public broadcaster which can really try and find the golden mean in a debate which unfortunately was supposed to be critical, but has, with all due respects to everybody, become corrosive of the national spirit? Do we require that in areas which require special focus, Kashmir, the left-wing extremist states, Northeast, the public broadcaster has a role to play? I think these are some of the issues which are extremely germane to this deliberation. Mrinalji spoke about the Prasar Bharati Act. I can't agree with her more. The Prasar Bharati Act was conceptualized at a point in time when there was one broadcaster in 1990. It never got notified till 1997. And some old timers tell me that it was in fact a quirk of history that it got notified and how it got notified. And then till 2007 or 2010, when we had the Geoman Prasar Bharati, even the personnel issues could not get resolved. And in these 20 years, you've had a situation whereby the entire media space is opened up. You have 833 odd television channels, 405 news channels. Is this plurality of the market or is this fragmentation? People come and tell me, broadcasters, please do not enforce the 12-minute advertising limit. Now I am in a quandary because those are licensing conditions which they have voluntarily undertaken. They have signed off on those licensing conditions. It's a part of the Cable Television Networks and Regulation Act, the Program and Advertising Code, which they have voluntarily undertaken to adhere or abide by. At the same time, I empathize with them because there is no revenue model in the industry. And I know that there are certain regional channels where a 10-second spot sells for as low as 500 rupees. And that's why the digitization which the Secretary talked about was our attempt to try and clean up the broadcasting space, to see that we can make it transparent, to see that subscriber revenues start kicking in. And this skewed model that we have in our broadcasting paradigm, where everything is advertisement dependent, and which is measured by a system of 8,000 odd boxes, which God alone knows are installed where, is something which is fundamentally unworkable. And that's why we've been telling the broadcasters, and I'm sorry to detract from Prasar Bharati for a moment, that we've been telling the broadcasters that you need to constitute the Broadcasting Advertising Research Council, BARC, or whatever acronym it's called by, so that you can have a more robust system. And one of the spin-offs of digitization is going to be, because one of the technological innovations which is possible, is that it is not that you will require 8,000 boxes. Today it is technologically feasible if it works out, I think at a cost of about 25 rupees extra per box, or maybe even less. The economies of scale will come down, because when you look at the broadcasting space, there are about 7 crore cable homes, another 7 crores in the DTH terrestrial and DTH space, that you would be able to have real-time data of who is actually watching which program at what point in time. When I raised it with some of our friends in the broadcasting industry, they said, this means government is going to play Big Brother. Government is going to have all the data with it. I said, government does not want the data. We are prepared through a statutory regulation process to hand it over to the Broadcasting Advertising Research Council, which you set up. So at least you have an empirical model available whereby you can measure as to how your industry is playing itself out. So coming back to Prasar Bharati and the Prasar Bharati Act, I would be more than happy that if the relationship between the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting and Prasar Bharati is that of the CNDG and the Ministry of Finance, that there is an administrative ministry for administrative purposes, otherwise, Prasar Bharati is really on its own, because it's a bit of an oxymoron. 2/3 of my budget, out of 2,800 crores, 1,885 odd crores goes to Prasar Bharati. I am supposed to be their recruiting authority, their disciplining authority, the guy who sanctions their tours abroad, and who does various other sorts of things. And yet, I am supposed to have an arm's length relationship with them. I am not God. So this needs to be fixed. And if this country requires a public broadcaster, then let it be accountable directly to Parliament, as it is mandated in the Prasar Bharati Act. And then allow me the liberty, as government, to have a full spectrum communications agency, which goes across print, broadcasting, online, whereby I can put my point of view out in the public space. After all, we spend billions and billions on developmental programs. And it's a part of communication is a part of that developmental remit. So, unfortunately, over a period of time, there are hybrids which have come into place and which have come to stay, which is also a part of the problem that we face. While I was growing up, I had the occasion of heading an organization which was based in Czechoslovakia. It split in front of my eyes. It became Czech lands and Slovenian students. It was an interesting time to be in Europe. The whole map of Europe was changing. And the one thing that I learned from that experience is that reform, which is incremental, reform which can be absorbed, reform which can be internalized, is reform which is sustainable. If you try and reform at a pace whereby you are not able to carry everybody along, that reform may sound very radical, it may sound very romantic also at times, but in sustainability, it is something which I would have my own doubts about. I would just like to close by pointing out one or two areas which I think are of concern, because since we've been talking a lot about the new media, there is absolutely no doubt about the fact that social media or new media as we know it has transformed the communication paradigm. From one broadcaster in 1990 to 833 in 2013 to 7 crore, or 10 crores as we speak. It's been a wonderful transformation. But there is a distinction that we need to make between privacy and anonymity. The right to privacy flows out of the right to life, which is guaranteed under Article 21. And I said this at the Internet Governance Conference even before I was asked by the Prime Minister to step up and serve. And it is incumbent upon media platforms to protect the privacy of their consumers. But privacy should not be confused with anonymity. And anonymity cannot be allowed to become a vehicle of launching hate campaigns and venting your angst against everybody, including the fact as to why were you born in the first place. So therefore, these are very critical challenges which we would need to address as we go along. The reason why I have not chosen to speak on some of these specific issues which these subgroups will be addressing is because I do not want to second guess. I don't want to impose my own opinion. But the little that I have learned in the last 5 months, trying to look at the back end of this business, makes me extremely nervous at times. I recall in the Rajya Sabha, Shabana ji was an honorable member of that house, when I had to answer a question, not an answer a question, reply to a statutory private member's resolution, incidentally brought, that I'm not scoring political brownie points, by the Bharatiya Janata Party, that there should be an independent regulator in the media space. I had the occasion of going back to a debate in the Rajya Sabha in 1974 on the Press Council Amendment Bill. And there was a very interesting point which was made by two people who watched the media very closely. Both of them are not with us, the late Mr. R.K. Mishra and Mr. Bhupesh Gupta. And they made a very important distinction which somehow has got swept under the carpet. The distinction between the freedom of the press and the freedom of the owner of the press. And I think that is something which also requires the consideration of such an eminent audience as we deliberate on the role of the public broadcaster. And let me close by saying that government has no intention of putting a regulator on content in the statutory space. When I talk to my friends in the media, I tell them I spend a fair amount of time in the telecom courts. I am conversant with the TRAI Act. And I find it a bit of an oxymoron, though some of my colleagues who work with me don't agree with me, that broadcasting was never supposed to be a part of the TRAI remit. I mean, if you look at the definitions, and if you look at the proviso, I mean, it beats me as a lawyer how a proviso can override a provision in itself. But be that as it may, I think broadcasting, the whole universe has grown and expanded in such an exponential manner that maybe the time has come to look on the techno-commercial side. I underscore, underline, put in inverted commas, on the techno-commercial side, the need for a separate broadcasting authority. And as I leave you, I would once again like to submit that these are not policy pronouncements of the government. This is not the thinking of the government. Thinking of the government will crystallize once we get recommendations from you. These are the ramblings of a middle-aged man who still thinks that he's young. Thank you very much.